I'm delighted to tell you that James Kelloway is the Energy Intelligence Manager at what we still, I think, refer to as the national grid. And it's one of those issues, James, that is absolutely mired in confusion and misinformation. So I thought we'd come straight to the source on this and just talk to you about, A, the potential of wind energy, and B, the reality. So let's begin with the hope that we will soon take an enormous amount of our national power from wind energy.
Yeah, good morning, James. Thank you very much for having me on the programme. Yeah, so we already are taking an enormous amount of our electricity from wind energy right now. So, for example, back last year in 2019, 20% of the whole country's electricity came solely from wind. You know, that's where we have been in 2019. You know, and that varies day to day as well. So, if you take an example from mid-August, you know, one day I think 60% of the country's energy actually came from wind on that particular day. So if you're asking about the reality of it, you know, it's one of our main generation sources within the UK. In fact, it's probably check up.
Well, and yet, as you will know, some of the media coverage is a curious combination of ignorant and ill-informed. So if I ask you some silly questions, do you promise not to laugh at me?
I promise not to laugh, and I promise to try and answer them, James.
Okay.
So fire away.
If we were 100% dependent upon wind energy and it wasn't windy, would all the lights go out?
So we're never going to be at a position where we're 100% dependent on wind energy. The key thing with electricity is it's made up with a cocktail mixture, if you like, of all different types of fuels,
yes.
and they balance in different ways.
I've got the app. My producer just told me you invented this app. I've got this amazing app which shows you from day to day what the national grid is, where the power going into the national grid is coming from, and that's how you know that some days it will be 20% wind, some days it will be lower, some days it will be much higher.
Exactly. So today isn't a particularly windy day, for example, and it's around about 20% of the national generation right now. The really important thing, though, is that as we decarbonise the electricity grid, which we're doing in the UK, in GB, you know, we're actually world leaders in this, and it's really important to recognise.
Hang on a minute, you're telling us we've got some world-beating technology under our noses at this very moment.
So if I give you an example, here we go. So if I told you that the electricity grid is nearly 60% cleaner in terms of carbon emissions than it was just in 2013.
Wow.
You know, and we're still continuing down that track, you know. So if you drove an electric taxi or an electric car back in 2013, it's now 60% better for the planet driving it today than it was back in 2013. You know, we're doing this stuff already. You know, our ambition is that by 2025, we will actually go for a period of time where we have no fossil fuel generating stuff on the electricity grid, the energy on the electricity grid. You know, we will actually be able to run carbon free for a period.
So it would never be 100% wind. So that day in 2025 would include other sustainable energy sources.
Yes, it would. So that would typically include, obviously, if it's during the day, solar, potentially nuclear, potentially water, hydro, that kind of thing. It's
incredible, isn't it, to reflect upon the reality of your daily professional experience and the curious messages that are often disseminated both in and by the media. It must be quite frustrating.
I wouldn't say frustrating. I mean, for us, it's a really great challenge. You know, so if I go back a few decades, you kind of balance. Okay, so people make power and people use power, and we kind of balance that in the middle, and that works really well. Okay.
Yes.
In the old world, you know, you'd kind of phone up someone and you'd say, "Can you produce this amount of power, please?" They'd control a big fireball, and hopefully the electricity would come out. And you kind of had control over that.
Yes.
Now we're working with renewables. It's much more exciting because with wind and with solar, you know, it's very much weather dependent. You know,
of course.
But depending on where we put the assets, actually, we've got a pretty good handle on what the weather's doing. And also, it's probably worth just mentioning, you know, the sheer scale of these wind turbines.
Yes, go on.
You know, so the very first one, I looked this up and I knew I was going on this one. The very first one was actually built in 1887. It could run about 5 hairdryers and it was about 18 metres tall. So that's where we were in 1887, about the time the first coal plant came on, right? The latest turbine today, you know, and I'm just picking one of the many types that are out there, is a 12 megawatt turbine, about 2/3 the size of the Eiffel Tower.
How many hairdryers can that run?
Give you an idea, that'll run. No, don't ask me to convert it to
Come
hairdryers.
on, you're supposed to be the expert.
Yeah, what I can tell you is that's around about 16,000 homes a year on one turbine.
Holy McMoly! So I
Yeah,
still labour, and I'm very into green energy, just as a person, not as a presenter or anything. I get it, and obviously I have young children who are way ahead of us, of our my generation in terms of what they know. But I still labour under some of the clearly very, very out of date illusions about the paucity of the power that it can provide. The bottom line is that this is the future, and we are, for once as a nation, fairly near the front of the pack.
We really are. We really are. If I just give just a couple of stats to bear
Please.
out, we're looking at like 100% increase in wind power between 2015 and 2019 alone. A lot of the new turbine designs, they actually can work in a whole variety of wind conditions. So you don't need a lot of wind speed to actually get them producing a lot of power, and they can produce a lot of power right up to really, really very windy wind speeds. So whereas they used to sort of, there's this whole sort of misinformation about, they cut out or it doesn't work in these conditions. Actually, they work in a whole lot of conditions, and these things are designed to be put out in the middle of the North Sea for many decades in terms of design life. They're pretty robust bits of kit.
And again, promise not to laugh, but why don't we store more energy, correct? Because again, promise not to laugh, but if we could be 100% wind, and actually it's a pointless ambition to be 100% wind if you're also relying upon solar and hydroelectric power. But I mean, is storage of environmentally friendly energy, is that a holy grail for your sector?
To a certain extent. I mean, the challenge with electricity, unlike say a fuel like gas, for example, with electricity, it's really hard to actually store it on the national scale. We can do it. We can do it in different ways.
Right.
So we've got many gigawatts of batteries starting to come on the system. That's new in the last year or two. Three. And we're going to see more and more of that. So we can store some stuff. Yeah, but also you've got more traditional power stations like pump storage, where you've got two lakes, one high up a mountain, one low up a mountain, and you use the excess power from wind energy or solar energy, for example, to pump that stuff up to the top, and then you can just let it back down again to make power when those renewables aren't there. So there are lots of different ways we can actually cope with these different technologies. And for us, it's around about how can we actually get a really good, cost-efficient and carbon-efficient output so that we can really decarbonise our energy system.
You're a brilliant communicator, James, as well as being a first-class scientist. It's incredibly helpful for us. I mean, you may not know the answer to this, but I know that I was a big fan of the wind turbine in Thetford that you used to be able to go up, but that closed down relatively recently. And my children came away from that visitor centre quite enthused and quite excited about what they could do. And can you think of any other places that people can go if they really want to get a clearer picture of the reality of sustainable energy and indeed energy intelligence?
Oh, I'd love to suggest somewhere. I mean, if ever you're on a flight coming in over sort of the east of London,
yes,
look out the window in the sea, because there are some really great wind farms down there in the ocean. You can actually look at them. For my kids, personally, I take them over to. There's a big ecotricity wind turbine over near Reading at Green Park.
Right. Yes, I've seen it.
So you can go over there. You can see what that one's doing, and that one looks absolutely massive when you're next to it. Actually, that's a baby one.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Because of course you can't see how big. So I feel like that character in Father Ted who thought the cows got smaller as they move further away. But obviously, if it's offshore, and there's a few down off Yarmouth, isn't there? And you've got no idea how big they are really because they're so far away.
No. And there's lots of logic to having them offshore because you get constant wind at sea. You're not interrupted by sort of the hills and the landscape and stuff. So you get a really good sort of flow in, and then we just run the cables under the ocean and back in on land.